All right. So if y'all could share this, I would greatly appreciate it. And we will go ahead and get started. What is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikase Sukasa. Of course, as always, I am your humble host, Niko House. Today, we're going to talk about something that obviously Tulsi is well known for, which is understanding regime change war and also dismantling the narratives that have been used to justify basically every regime change war for the last 100 years and probably even before that we don't even know about. So the reason I wanted to do this video was because I felt like it was very important, because the conversation that's being had is with a guy who is kind of a libertarian. I would classify him as a, libertarian mostly because he is socially liberal, but he firmly believes in getting government 100% out of business and things like that. But his name is Jacco. He's for the most part, he's a nice guy. He had very nice interaction with Tulsi. Didn't jump on her or attack her when she disagreed or corrected him. Didn't seem to take it personally. But because he is a Navy SEAL or former Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL, there is always the element of conditioning that just kind of comes naturally when you've been in the military for that long. It's hard for people to accept. I mean, being a veteran myself, and I've seen it up close and personal, it's hard for people to accept that whatever narrative that they're seeing is been kind of force-fed through a lens of operation. If you can't give a soldier too much information for a number of reasons, but primarily it's because, well, if they have too much information, they might not want to finish the mission. It's too much for them to think about. They might overthink the mission. So they don't want to give you too much information. And of course, the higher you get on a totem pole, as crazy as it seems, until you get to a certain point of like maybe a 4-star general, like maybe you're working in DC. But when you're Special Forces, Navy SEAL, even Delta Force, Ranger, the higher up on the totem pole you go, the less information you get. But the bigger the stakes are, and there's a reason for that. So I'm glad that Tulsi engaged him in the way that he did, and we're going to talk about that right now. So let's check out this clip. We're going to talk about it. By the way, I hope you all watched that Joe Rogan interview with Tulsi. It was dope overall.
Probably not a good idea. This is probably not a good idea to bail out right now. We don't need to leave a massive force there, but if we leave a few,
Just for some context, what he's talking about right now was his justification for not leaving Iraq when we did. Now, of course, the easiest rebuttal ever is, well, we should have never been there. So
a couple brigades worth of men, then, we'll probably be able to handle any problems that happen.
But do you hear this? Once again, it's a Navy SEAL. Nice enough guy, very intelligent, but we're conditioned to see the world in a certain light. Like we have to be the saviors. We have to be the white knights. He's like, we should have left a couple of brigades of soldiers there, right? Who are we to just establish a couple of brigades in someone else's country? We should have never been there to begin with. And he's like, if we established multiple brigades there, then we could have handled the situation better. It's once again, it's just a condemnation of the self-determination of individuals. That's really what it comes down to.
But we didn't. We left completely, and those insurgents that were there, they were like little embers, and they started to get fired up again. And then the next thing you know, you had ISIS. And by the way, ISIS marched back into Ramadi. And the reports we got from people on the ground that we knew was that ISIS came in, and anyone that had worked with coalition forces on any level, they would murder the whole family. There's about 500 families that were completely murdered. So when we talk about these things, we have to be very sure about what we're going to do. We have to recognize that we can't predict everything, because we can't. I don't care how good you are and care how many analysis you put on something. When you start throwing human nature into a leadership vacuum, all these things are going to break out, and it can go very, very bad. It can go well too, but it can go very, very bad. And so what are we willing to sacrifice? What are we willing to spend? How many of our brothers and sisters in uniform are we willing to sacrifice to make this happen? And how does it help our national security? I believe right now, had we stayed there, Iraq would be a pretty strong, positive place right now if we had kind of...
So once again, this is the problem with regime change wars. He can't even really codify what he's referring to as the mission. Like, oh, if we would have stayed there and completed it the way we were supposed to, then Iraq would be a strong place. What does that mean? We overthrew Saddam Hussein when we weren't supposed to. That wasn't our business. If the Iraqi people wanted Saddam gone, they could have done what people generally do when they don't like a leader, which is holistically do not like a leader. They generally overthrow them by themselves. They determine the outcome of their futures. That is what self-determination is all about. And when a country and the people are allowed to do that, they tend to have a much stronger democracy because of it. But when he is saying, oh, if we would have stayed a little bit longer and finished the mission the right way, the mission was to overthrow Saddam. The mission wasn't to bring democracy to Iraq. The mission was to overthrow Saddam. If you want to go a little bit deeper and talk about the quote unquote war on terror, one, you can't win a war on an idea. You just can't do it. Not with guns and bullets anyway. You can only win the war of ideas with ideas. That's the only way you can win that war. However, if you want to talk about the mission, other than Saddam Hussein, it would be to quote unquote take out terrorism in the area. That's all well and good, except for our mere presence there caused a massive spike in terrorism, and it was clear that the terrorism was coming from our presence. I mean, it was clear. I mean, and it's a consistent theme, right? The moment we walk into Iraq, terrorism spikes. The moment we walk into Afghanistan, terrorism has a huge uptick. The moment we walk into Syria, terrorism spikes. Isn't that a coincidence? Why does it seem like everywhere we go, terrorism is there somehow, some way? It's almost as if we created this idea of the war on terror because we knew that the moment that we show up in a place, if we needed there to be some terrorists there, all of a sudden some terrorists show up. And if the terrorists show up, we have a reason to be there and no one can tell us to leave. And then, of course, if you're surging troops, if you will, you don't have to declare war as president. You can surge a certain amount of troops every month or every year to take care of a mission. And guess what? You can send special forces whenever you want to as president of the United States. And that's what happened in Iraq, by the way. So we never had to declare war. So you not only create an enemy that you really can't beat, because once again, you can't beat ideas with bullets, but then you made it so if I'm attacking certain terrorist cells around certain nations, I don't even have to declare war. I can send enough troops to take care of that terrorist cell. It's not a coincidence. That's why he can't say what it would look like if the mission was complete, if we had accomplished what we had set out to accomplish. I hate to break it to Jacco. Once again, very nice gentleman, very respectful, was really cool to Tulsi, didn't get any shouting match arguments, anything like that, even when Tulsi disagreed with him or he disagreed with her. But the truth of the matter is, this is what the mission looked like. The mission was successful. I know that sounds crazy to believe, but the goal wasn't to establish a democracy in Iraq. The goal had always been to destabilize Iraq because it had been such a threat to us in the past. And more specifically, it had always been a threat to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all of those interests out there at the UAE. So, to continue.
Completed the mission the way that we should have. Again, when we go back and we say, okay, well, what countries is it worth going into? You know, where are we going to go? How do we draw that line? How do we make that decision? For me, this is what we do as leaders. What we do as leaders, we look at a situation.
I want to be clear about something. I'm not going to joke. I'm not, once again, not an attack on Jacco. Nice enough guy. But you're a Navy SEAL. Your job is to take orders without considering context. So when you say what we do as leaders, you might be the leader of your team, but only within the context of that mission, only within the scope of the orders you have already been given. You cannot deviate away from those orders unless you get the order to do so or get permission to do so. But you're not a leader that has to take into context X amount of factors before you just dive head first in. They point, you go shoot. Very rarely when they point, do you not shoot? I doubt there was an instance where you're like, man, I wonder if we should question this. I wonder if we should question if we should be killing this guy. No, the moment you get a name, you go assassinate. You might look up collateral damage to make sure you're not trying to cause any extra pain, any extra death or bloodshed, but that's it. But once you get that name, you're going to get the intel, you're going to trust that intel, and you're going to execute because you're not the leader. And it's not an insult to him. That's his job. That's the job he chose. But you got to understand, like, convincing yourself that you were a leader in that situation overseas, especially as a Navy SEAL or a Special Forces team. You're not a leader per se. You might be the leader of your squad, but in the grand scheme of these situations, you're merely a knight on a chessboard. And luckily you're not a pawn. So.
And sometimes, you got to ask yourself, we have a moral obligation to go somewhere. If there's a genocide happening, if there's another Rwanda happening, where 800,000 Tutsis are killed in 100 days with machetes, if that's going on, do we have a moral obligation to try and do something to help that? Hey, that's a decision you have to make. That's a hard decision to make.
By the way, we're going to talk about that.
Leader, because guess what? You're going to lose 30, 40, 100 Americans that are going in there and trying to shut this thing down. But that's the type of thing we need to think about. And that's why, as a leader, you want to have an open mind. You want to have your ego completely out of it. Because it's real easy to say, oh, we're America. This is what we do. We're going to win. It's like, no, actually, we made a bad decision. And we're actually leaving right now because we think the expenditure from here on out is going to be too high. Unfortunately, I think in Iraq, we paid the upfront expenditure. We had invested lives. And
so that's, like I said, this guy I don't think he's a bad actor. Like, you can hear, he knows that there are situations where we should not be involved. And like, the mission was doomed from the start. And he's talking about all the bad that happens when you do that. And he's talking about the bad that happened in Iraq, resources wise, lives wise. And so you can tell he's not a bad actor, but this is a very genuine guy. And even as intelligent as he is, this is how strong propaganda and consent that is manufactured by the government is. That's how strong it is, that even the most intelligent people will fall for it, and they will live their lives by it.
Treasure to try and get that place stabilized. We had done a decent job. We were almost there, and we left early. And all of a sudden we look around and go, oof. But that's why these things are important to think about thoroughly, as Tulsi said, before you go. We don't know what's going to happen. And, if you're going to get in a street fight, Joe, like, you look, as capable as you are, as capable as I am at street fighting, that's great. There's that 10% chance that guy pulls out a knife and sticks it in your neck. And are you willing to sacrifice that? Now, if the guy's doing something to an innocent person and you go, you know what? I got to take that risk right now. I'm going to go in and I'm going to get this thing handled. Those are hard decisions to make, and we have to think through them.
Very well said. If there was one thing when I brought you two together that I thought that you might disagree on, it would be this stance on non-interventionist foreign policy. I don't know if that's even the right word, disagree. But I think there's nuances to these decisions and these things you talk, and I think you would agree with that.
Yeah.
And Rwanda, what you talked about, is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a moral responsibility to go in when you see some atrocities being committed? I mean, that's one thing that people either pro or con on is the United States, are we the police force of the world? Are we the moral high ground?
Yeah, I don't, just listening to you, Jock, I think that, I don't think that we actually disagree very much. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there are important distinctions to be made. My opposition to regime change wars should not be mistaken for isolationism, nor should it be mistaken for anything other than what it is. Let's stop fighting regime change wars that are so often waged in the guise of humanitarianism, but they are pushed forward for other reasons, or they're political reasons or corporate reasons or whatever, and they try to get the sympathy of the American people, and they use the same words, this guy's a monster, this is this. When you actually peel back the layers, there are ulterior motives in place that set the pretext to use our military to go and overthrow a regime in another country or topple a dictator, that ultimately ends up more often than not resulting in the lives of the suffering, more suffering for the people in the countries we're supposedly trying to go and help. However, I've been very strong on this. We're talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, these other jihadist terrorists who are a threat to our national security. We need to stay strong in defeating that threat. That is our function as warriors, as service members in the military, is to go and protect and defend the American people and to take out those who seek to do us harm. In the case of a genocide like Rwanda, where there is killing of people at a massive scale, we look to see, hey, is there something that we can do to help end this genocide? Can we work with other countries? Can we bring together a coalition that can effectively stop this genocide? And if the answer to that is yes, then we should do so. But the problem that we've seen a lot more recently is you'll see the word genocide being used very loosely as an excuse to go and say, hey, well, go and topple this dictator who is inflicting a genocide on their own people without it actually meeting the criteria of a genocide, when really there's a conflict within the country, whether it be based on politics or power or whatever. That's a very different thing than this, than like what we saw in Rwanda, for example. So, as you say, I agree. I think.
So that was absolutely masterful. I mean, she got it like 98, 99%. Like that, as far as presidential candidates are concerned, as far as potential people to be commander-in-chief and run the United States military, that was about as perfect as an answer that you could have rebutted with. She wasn't combative, which is once again one of the things that I love about her approach. She's very, very diplomatic. She understood where he was coming from. Like, even though she may not have agreed with us being in Iraq, for example, she understood what he meant. Like what could have happened, what should have happened, the extenuating circumstances, cool. But at the same time, she proceeded to educate him on the issue of regime change and the most important part of that issue, which is what? How consent is manufactured. In that clip, Tulsi talked about the fact they'll throw the word genocide out there that may not have actually been a genocide. She talked about the fact that a political issue, an economic issue between the people of a country and its government is not a genocide, nor is it a qualifying circumstance to invade another country and overthrow their government. It's talking about the use of sympathy, saying they use the same words over and over and over again. I wish you would have used the term propaganda, actually. But she said they're going to use the same words over and over and over again to get people to feel justified into going into these wars. They'll demonize the leader. Like, they won't talk about what X situation should look like if the mission is accomplished. Remember what we said with Iraq, we never said what it would look like when the mission is accomplished. We always said we were going there to defeat Saddam and get rid of Al-Qaeda. We never said what was next. Elections were next, but come on. It was elections that we had our thumb on a scale on. So, but I think what she said that was the most true is what our ultimate goal is. She framed it a little bit differently, but I'm saying that this is what our ultimate goal is. She was like, what ultimately ends up happening after these regime change wars is that the area becomes destabilized and the people suffer more after the regime change war or after the regime change that we set forth than they were suffering before the regime change that, once again, we set forth. Now, when you can understand all these circumstances, because my only issue with what she said was, we do have to stay strong in defeating Al Qaeda. Now, I only have an issue because she does not qualify that statement with using all the elements that we have that are non-violent, that are non-interventionist, to defeat Al Qaeda, and then bringing up, of course, her No More Presidential Wars Act, Stop Funding Terrorism Act, stop financing terrorism, stop arming terrorism, which, for those of you who don't know, means it's legislation that she introduced to stop financing it completely. And if we find out that you finance it as our ally, like if we find out for sure, then we would be able to implement sanctions on you for funding and financing terrorism. Same thing with the arming side of terrorism. Like, this is what she means by dismantling and by staying strong. I mean, I don't have to guess what she means by that. But when you're speaking on an interview like this, it is important to be clear in qualifying, because if I say it, yeah, it's cool, but it always sounds better. I know her history. This is, what I do. However, for her, somebody could take that and run with it, and they'll completely cut off everything she said before that statement and after that statement. But it is nuanced, right? We cannot pretend like the problem of terrorism doesn't exist, even if we were the ones who created it. Even if we were the ones who created the problem. And for the most part, we did create the problem. So we have to figure out the best approach that empowers the people, not just one opposition, one rebel group against the government, which always seems to be the case, right? Every time we go and fight terrorism in a specific country, we arm a rebel group, say that it's for fighting terrorism, and then all of a sudden there's a civil war. It's weird how that works, right? But what she said about everything that happens after regime change war is the ultimate goal of the regime change war. It's never about implementing a democracy. It's about bringing instability to a region that may be too stable because of the government that is in place. When a government is generally successful in a resource heavy region, then we have to remove that government, because generally when governments are successful, like in Libya, the people are going to benefit from it. So we have to go in and manufacture a problem that invites our presence there. Now, how do I know that this is the goal? And I'm actually really glad they brought up Rwanda, because it is the same situation, right? It's very similar to Libya, except for there's one key point. Well, I guess it isn't really a key point. A key difference. I'm about to say it's a difference, but it's in a different way. So we were active in our overthrowing of Gaddafi. We were very active and very outspoken about it. However, the Rwanda genocide is a special circumstance. Special circumstance that isn't really talked about a lot. That genocide didn't happen out of nowhere, where he was talking about the 800,000 Tutsis that were massacred. That genocide did not happen out of nowhere. I'm going to try to pronounce his name. But the assassination of President Habyarimana, like I said, I probably pronounced his name way wrong. The assassination of Habyarimana, that's his whole last name, was what started that genocide of Rwanda. And the reason why was because while traveling in a plane, his plane was shot down by missiles. And of course, this is President Clinton. So this is 1994, I believe this happened. Now his plane was shot down by missiles, the president, right around the time, it's a weird coincidence, right? Right at the same time that there was about to be peace in the region, because he was actually going to work with the opposition leader to sign a peace treaty to bring stability. Isn't that weird? Because if I recall, Gaddafi, as he was about to step down from being the president of Libya to bring stability in the region and keep the United States out, all of a sudden, a couple months later, he was assassinated too. And it's also super weird. Whenever Israel and Palestine were actually about to sign the treaty of all treaties, their conflict was finally about to come to an end. I wish I could remember that president's name, but the former prime minister of Israel who was assassinated, I believe he's the only one who has been assassinated, if I'm not mistaken, right when he was about to sign that peace treaty to end the conflict between Israel and Palestine. He was assassinated. This is, by the way, one was during the Clinton State Department administration, and the other three, were during the Bill Clinton administration. Super coincidence, I'm sure. Now, this president of Rwanda had his plane shot down right before this peace treaty was signed. Well, his wife, or his widow, I should say, did not believe that this happened just because of an opposition leader. Because otherwise, why didn't they just try to assassinate you before? Why didn't they shoot down your plane before? Why would the opposition leader authorize a missile attack when he was one of the ones, or he was the main one, that agreed to sign the peace treaty? Unless somebody was pulling his strings. And that brings us to this y'all, listen, I'm not good with African names. Habia Ramana. Habiari Mana. Man, I'm gonna butcher that name 8 more times. Versus the United States Amicus Curiae. This is a lawsuit that is implicating the new president at the time of Rwanda. Now, the lawsuit is, saying like, look, I don't know if he directly did it, but he had some involvement in the assassination of her late husband. Now, here's the part that's most interesting. Going back to what Tulsi said about manufacturing consent, going back to what I talked about, she brought up the points of what happens after regime change happens, right? Just destabilization and suffering everywhere. And that's ultimately my point here too, because the final order to shoot down the president was given by the defendant Kagame during a meeting held in Mulindi, Rwanda on or about March 31st, 1994, with the planning operational phase being entrusted to Colonel James Kabarebe, who was specifically charged with the formation of a team specialized to use the surface-to-air missiles furnished by Uganda in a conspiracy with members of the non-governmental Rwanda Patriotic Army. Isn't that how it always goes? Somehow there's always just a random rebellion group that just gets weapons inexplicably. That's crazy. Now, here's where it gets good, as usual. Oh, hold on, I lost my spot. Give me 1 second. Okay, here it goes. So the case goes on to say, something else also matters. During the pendency of this action in the district court, the United States, at the request of the Rwandan government, the new Rwandan government, submitted a suggestion of immunity on behalf of President Kagame, who is the new president of Rwanda. In other words, the United States government inexplicably sent a suggestion of immunity on behalf of the Rwandan president who's accused of assassinating the former president, which led to a genocide of 800,000 Rwandans. So if you're curious as to why we all of a sudden didn't get involved in that genocide, but absolutely every time somebody, we claim that there was a genocide happening in Syria, for example. We claim that there was a religious genocide happening there. Wasn't true. Was not true. I can't be clearer about that. That was not true. However, and by the way, it wasn't true because that would make no sense, because their government is secular. Secular governments just have historically never committed genocides. Okay? So, with that being said, we the genocide came from an action that was, I mean, we can argue the semantics, but I'm just going to keep it real. It was very clear that the United States was okay at the very bare minimum with what had taken place in Rwanda when the former president was assassinated and shot out of the sky. It goes on to say the United States has taken interest in this action because the defendant, President Kagame, is the sitting head of state, the sitting head of state for a foreign country, thus raising the question of President Kagame's immunity from the court's jurisdiction while in office. The Constitution assigns the United States president alone the responsibility to represent the nation in its foreign relations. The interest of the United States in this matter arises from the determination by the executive branch of government of the United States in consideration of relevant principles of customary international law and in the implementation of its foreign policy and in the conduct of its international relations to recognize President Kagame's immunity from the suit while in office. You know what's crazy about that? You know how we love to pretend like we love democracy. Kagame wasn't democratically elected. I just told you the assassination of the former president led to an 800,000 Tutsi genocide. In a lot of bloodshed. A lot of bloodshed. It didn't get, Rwanda didn't become stable after that, as most of you all know. But my question is, why were we so quiet about it? All of a sudden, we don't care about bloodshed. We had to go to Kuwait. We had to go to Operation Desert Storm, Operation Desert Shield. I'm confused. I thought that the reason we do everything is because of genocides. And now the reason we went to Libya because we said that Gaddafi was genociding his people. Isn't that what we said? So once again, this just exemplifies all of the ways that we manufacture consent to go to war. So that's why I was happy that he used Rwanda, because it gives us a chance to see, there was one key difference. When that president got assassinated and there was a genocide and great instability that came, it seems like that was the goal, because that president got assassinated. 800,000 people were killed. We didn't do anything about it, right? We never even mentioned it on the news. But the United States, through the executive branch of government, when Bill Clinton was the president of the United States, filed a suggestion of immunity to make sure that the one person accused of being involved with the assassination of the former president could not be held accountable while he was president, and we had no idea how long that was going to be. And that was, once again, by design. We were recognizing someone as the head of state based off of literally nothing but an assassination right before a peace treaty. And once again, the United States has always had a habit of recognizing the opposition leaders in power, even if that opposition has a minority of support. Isn't that interesting? So once again, we may not have directly overthrown the Ugandan government, or Rwandan government, but we don't know if we funded that entire operation the entire time. I do know that the Ugandan government, who supposedly assisted in the assassination of the former president of Rwanda, we do know that we were funding and working with them. We do know that. Just like we couldn't say for a fact if the people in Libya that Gaddafi were fighting were specifically employed by us in one form or another. However, we do know this: the former leader of Chad, which is the country directly neighboring Iraq, was in our pockets, was working on our behalf. And the moment that he was done being useful to us, we then prosecuted him for war crimes and pretending like the International Criminal Court actually does what it's supposed to do. If the ICC did what it was supposed to do, George Bush, Dick Cheney, President Obama, hell, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. I mean, there's a list go on. John Kerry. All these people would be tried for war crimes right now if it did its job, but it doesn't. So, like I said, it was great to hear her break that down, but more so, it really exemplified just why she's just so much better on foreign policy than everyone else. Because my thing is, I know that a lot of people say they want peace above all else. Like all the candidates in some form or fashion say they want peace. That's what they all say. But then they start talking about all the different extenuating circumstances that will allow them to participate in the same military interventionism that we already practice. You know, even the good candidates, even the decent ones who are very honest, still fall into the same traps, showing that they haven't learned anything. Now, because of that, we're at a crossroad where we now need somebody who was saying they want peace, but knows, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like this. If you got a BMW vehicle, that's a very complicated car with a very complicated engine under that hood with a lot of complicated moving parts. You could say you want your BMW fixed. That's cool. I want my BMW to run perfectly. All right, but the problem is you have to pay somebody else to do that correctly, and you don't even know if they're going to do the job correctly. If you go to BMW, they might just set you up for failure and tell you, hey, you're fine. You just pay $2,000. You got to go back in 5 months because they keep screwing you over because they have incentive for you to keep bringing them back and for you to keep making the same mistake. That's how the government generally works when it comes to presidents and leaders. However, it's different if you say, I want to fix my BMW, and I know exactly how to fix it. I can take this BMW apart, or the engine apart, and I can put it back together myself. And when I take it apart, I can troubleshoot the issue at various steps to make sure that it's done correctly without having to replace anything. Or if you do have to replace something, it's usually small. You ain't going to have to replace the engine. The engine would be the regime, by the way. Thinking that new engine going to work differently. Nah. You can be preventative if you understand how the engine works, right? But you can't do that if you just have to wait for something to break, for someone else to tell you how to fix it, when you have all these predatory mechanics out here trying to just get a buck. That's how it goes. So I hope you all enjoyed that segment. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you're still subscribed. Make sure the notification bell is still turned on if it is not turned on. Make sure you follow us on Rokfin. The link for me is in the description. You can also follow Sofia Zadivar on Rokfin and also the Convo Couch on Rokfin as well. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed it, and more than anything else, always remember